Okay, well, welcome to another session in 1 Corinthians 11. We're starting with verse 11. I have a few more comments to make on verse 11 before we head out to verse 12. But before I get started, I have a couple of things to draw your attention to. Is that I provided everybody here with a sheet that just in the red letters is what I consider to be, and what really makes sense to me to be, a quotation of Paul from the Corinthian letter. And then underneath, and I have that in the red letters, and then blue letters is what I consider to be Paul's response to what they say. And I found it to be really interesting to notice, if you look at the teeter-totter that I have along with it, is that you'll find that the red letters are all a Corinthian perspective, and the blue letters are what Paul calls the in the Lord perspective. And you see in parentheses that I've put a few of my own definitions of various words. As you know, that words are like rail switches, and they can take you. Here's the rail switch here, is that a little word, it's just a little word, but it's like a rail switch, which is just a little mechanism. It can take you far different places depending upon how you use that word. And so in parentheses, I have put the rail switch that I think the word should go on, okay? And that's what that sheet is all about. I also want to bring attention to some of the authors that have helped me understand these things, and I'm going to go from the well-known to the ones that you may not know as well. Many of you have heard of Kevin Giles. He is the guy that was first brought to my attention concerning women and the church. And he gives a history of all the times through the church age, all the way through the centuries and millennia, that this doctrine of God being the head of Christ, therefore man being the head of woman, has had to be refuted and disproved and declared by the church to be a heresy. And it's or through time, it has been declared many times by very influential men of God. Athanasius, Augustine, Calvin are three major ones that had to address this issue and declare it and prove it to be a heresy. So we're talking about something that's got some heavy weight to it, and he has been influential to me. I have also been very blessed by these two guys right here, Watson and Cully, for their work on quotations in the book of 1 Corinthians, right here. And so that is one that I have, when I started realizing that it's possible that what is being said in here is contradictory because there's two different voices talking, this is one of the guys that helped. The third one is a real woman of stature. Her name is Lucy Peppiatt. She is the principal of Westminster Theological Center at Oxford University, England. And she has written a book called Women and Worship in Corinth. Lucy Peppiatt. And she is a scholar, and she has written an excellent book on this subject of 1 Corinthians 3:11, 3 through 10, being a Corinthian heretical quotation that Paul is going to refute in the verses 11 through 16. And that's what this book is all about. So if you are interested, these are sources that have been very helpful to me. I have one other one I'll put up on the screen when I get it on the screen too, named Margaret Mutzko, who has a blog that I've been following for probably a couple years now. Very scholarly and very good. Anyway, now let's get going here on this verse here. Nevertheless, neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. As you can see, this is the rail switch word. Nevertheless is the rail switch word. We have been going along with the one track. And now with the word nevertheless, we are switching rails and we're heading in an entirely different direction, which Paul calls the in the Lord direction, because we'll find that in almost every translation they're very true to the Greek, where it doesn't say in the Lord last in this sentence. It says in the Lord first in this sentence. Some of your translations may say that nevertheless in the Lord is neither is the man without the woman, neither the woman without the man in the Lord. And we have discussed some things about this already. I just want to get to the sharp refutations in this, is that this word is a sharp refutation, and that is one of the earmarks that there is being two voices that are talking. One is being quoted and the other is refuting the first voice. And this is the verse where we switch to Paul's voice. That's what we have here in the red and the blue. The red is the Corinthian voice, the blue is Paul's voice. If you look at it, you can see verse for verse, they contradict each other. They contradict each other. It is quite obvious once you notice it. Along the way, the phrase, neither man without the woman, apart from woman, neither woman without the man, apart from, exclusive of the man, is a sharp refutation of 7, 8, and 9, verses 7, 8, and 9, where it says there that the only reason that woman is created is to glorify man and meet men's needs. And now we have a sharp refutation saying, no. Man is not exclusive from woman. In the Corinthian church, the obligation of mutual care for each other that we see in chapter 12, verse 25, where it says that the members should have the same care for one another, the same care for one another had degenerated down, so it's women have to have care for men. But men have absolutely no obligation to care for women. And that's refuted in a different another place here in 1 Corinthians 7:3. Paul makes it clear that men and women have equal responsibilities to fill each other's needs. It says, "Let the husband," and that word there is not husband; it's "let the male." The translators decided, well, we're going to make this husband and wife, but the word in Greek is "let the male." Let the male fulfill his duties, his obligations to, and they put the wife, but the word there is gynike, and that means female. Let the male fulfill his obligations to the female, and likewise let the female her obligations to the male. So it's the same thing that's being talked about in verse 11 is also being talked about in chapter 7, verse 3 there, is that both men and women have an obligation to have the same care for one another. It's not just a pie in the sky thing. There's an obligation to have the same, and the same means no difference. No difference. There's another thing in 1 Corinthians that Paul gets at where he says that there's certain members of the body that say, I have no need of you. It's in chapter 12 too. I have no need of you. And when we have a culture in the church that says men have no need of women, they can go it alone. They can do things and be just fine on their own. They're missing something as far as the distinctive contributions that both need to make in order for it to be something that's going to be done in the Lord. Almost all commentators view this statement here in verse 11 as Paul softening what he has just dogmatically said in verses 4 through 10. Is that in verses 4 through 10, everybody has to admit it's dogmatic. This is the way it is. There is no other way. This God made it this way, and I'm here to make sure that you do it God's way. And that's the tone of those verses there. And they take 11 and 12 because they assume, wrongly I believe, that verses 3 through 10 are Paul talking. That Paul really believes this stuff. And so now in verse 11 and 12, where they see an absolute, it's an obvious contradiction. This verse contradicts what was said earlier. They can't have that. You can't have Paul contradicting himself. So what has been done is that they have presented, and this is the general teaching in the church today, that 11 and 12 are Paul kind of softening his tone about the dogmatic stuff that he just finished saying, yeah, well, men are superior, women are inferior, but they got to cooperate in order for the human race to continue on, and it's more like this is just a balancing out, and he's restraining his extreme views about women. But the common sense tells us that this verse and verse 12 are a direct contradiction. They are not a softening. They aren't a balancing. They aren't a clarifying statement from what he said before. They're a contradiction against what was said before. And that's it's not this balancing act. It's just that he's changed things, and he says, you've had your say, now I'm going to refute you. I'm going to refute everything you said. Okay, let's take a look at verse 12 here. For as the woman is of the man, even so is the man also by the woman. But all things are of God. Both 11 and 12 have, one says in the Lord, and this one says of God. So he always brings things around to the important thing, to the one that is actually the important person in the relationship. God's true nature is shown in this verse. We've seen that God's true nature was not shown in the fact that in the verses previous that said that God created man and he gave everything to man. And then he said, well, man, we're going to give him someone to help him, but we're not going to give anything to him. All the glory went to man. Woman, the only glory she had was to give glory to man. This is a contradiction of that, where it's saying that as the woman is of the man, and the word "of" there is out of, as the woman is out of the man. Yes, we know that one time woman came out of man, right? Rib. But then Paul points out the other side, and so in the Corinthian view, they say because woman came out of man, therefore man is superior and woman is inferior. But Paul goes right on to say, even so, the man also by the woman. And the word for by there is through the woman. Now, the very first man did not come through the woman, right? Came through dirt. But ever since then, and always up until now, all men have come through women. One time, woman came through man. And ever since then, both men and women have come through women. And that's what he's pointing out there. It says, let's tell the rest of the story about the creation account here. And that's the true character of God coming through, is how he decided to do things. Let's see. Paul intends to separate a mixture that was done by the Corinthian teachers in the earlier verses of this paragraph, and that he's now trying to separate the mixture because the mixture is that they have taken little bits of Scripture and they've mixed it together with the Roman idea of male superiority and domination. And they've mixed that together and called it Christianity. And now Paul is attempting to separate out that mixture and take away that mixture from being something that is believed to be the Bible. There is no legitimate lordship for anyone in male lordship or female lordship. Remember, I love these two statements here because they are eternal. They're not just an answer to Corinthian culture. They're an answer to all cultures. As somebody pointed out, they said there are cultures that are matriarchal. Well, he talks about that too. He says, yes, woman is of man. But then he goes on to say that there is also the other side of that coin too. So he's even-handed about it, not just addressing the immediate issue in Corinth, but addressing the issue of God's entire purposes, that they both, no matter what culture, no matter what time in history, they both are going to be interdependent on each other. One thing I noticed in here is that in this verse here, notice there is no first and second mentioned. And in today's current teaching that goes on, there is a big, big deal made about because man was first, he is superior. Because woman was second, she is inferior. And I noticed in both verse 11, take a look at verse 11. There's no mention of first and second there. Verse 12, no mention of first and second there either. Is that to Paul, this whole big issue that has developed and doctrine that's developed about primacy by chronological creation was not in Paul's sights at all. First and second didn't make any difference. No matter if they came from dirt or a bone, that didn't, just because someone came from dirt first does not make them superior over someone that came second out of bone. There is no substance to the idea that says man is superior because he is first. That is not, and what is, you will not find that. Many have talked about the idea that in Jewish culture, the firstborn male gets everything. And they said it wouldn't be that way if God hadn't made it that way from the beginning. The first one gets everything. The second one gets nothing. Now, in my family, Norwegian, that same idea spread all over the place. And because my great-grandfather wasn't firstborn, guess where he ended up? He had to get on a boat and come on over here to find, because he got nothing. And that idea has come out of this primacy by chronological creation doctrine. And it's called Christian. And you know what? It's not. It's not Christian. Just because the Hebrews had a tradition of doing that, and that does not mean that is anywhere required by God, that should be the way it is. It's not required by God just because it's a Hebrew tradition. It is not part of the Torah. Not part of the Torah. There's only one reference, and that has to do with somebody giving all their goods to their firstborn son. That doctrine has been ignored entirely by Paul when he gives an account of man and woman relationships, even man and man relationships. The only one that can claim superiority is the one where both of them came out of God. And it says all things of God, but he's not talking about microbes and galaxies and things like that. The context of this whole thing is man and woman. So really what it should say there, and can and should be understood, is that both are of God, but both are of God. And there's an equality. There is a mutual reliance on each other in that.
The correction there then is, it says that woman came out of man. Paul is saying the woman come out of God.
Yes, woman came out of God. That's right.
He's correcting that thing. He's taking those half-truths that were mentioned earlier that said that woman came out of man, But Paul is saying, no, woman came out of God. Okay? And man did not come out of dirt either. He came out of God too. Verse 13. Now we're finally to something that's made some sense to Doc here along the way, and I got a few things to point out in this one here. It says, judge in yourselves. Because now in verse 11 and 12, I think that those two verses have to be taken into greater consideration when churches are deciding how they're going to proceed to get the work of God done. But when we get to verse 13, he's getting down to specifics, and he says, judge in yourselves. Is it comely that a woman pray unto God uncovered? ? Now, at first glance, you know what this statement seems to be saying, that the nature and character of God provides that everyone has the freedom to make up their own minds and judge within themselves, and that God will approve of whatever decision they make. Doesn't that seem to be what that seems to be saying there? You can decide for yourself if it's comely or not. And whatever you decide is fine with God. But that's not the God that I know of in the Bible. So when we're talking about does this line up with the true nature and character of God? The God that I know in the Bible has very strong opinions about what's comely and what's not comely. He doesn't go, whatever you decide, I'll back it. What if somebody decided, and they said, God, I have decided that it is very uncomely for a woman to pray uncovered. Because according to the popular idea of what this verse says, it says that God would say, it's okay, make her cover. Make her get covered. If you think that's comely, if that's more comely than being uncomely, then fine, you do it that way, and I'll back you on that, because it's okay with me, whatever you decide. But that's not the Lord. That's just not the Lord. You get this idea, as one guy said, that the Lord is my shield and my butler. Is that whatever I decide, he'll do. Whatever I decide, he'll agree on. And that is not the character of God. So the first glance at this is not necessarily getting us to what Paul was actually talking about here. There is an interesting little thing that I have to point out to you. We've talked about this a couple of different other places, is that there is mistranslations. That the Greek text says such and such a thing, but if they stay true in their translation of the Greek text, it will reveal a blatant contradiction. So they can't have a blatant contradiction. So what they do is that they very carefully switch some of the grammar. And this is one of the cases here in point. There's a little word in here, and if you look at that verse, it says, judge for yourself. Is it comely? Is it? I want you to focus in on is it. I've looked at this, and the word that is translated is it is actually, the word is, you don't need to know the grammar, but the word is esti. And esti does not mean is it. Doesn't mean that. You know what esti means? It is. Flip them around. You know why I know that's just not an error? Because in verse 14 and 15, it says it is, where the Greek word is esti. In both verse 14, where it says it is a shame, and in verse 15, where it says it is a glory, esti is translated correctly. Oh, I got my concordance out and I looked up every esti that there is in the New Testament. You know what? It's always translated it is, except for here. Except for here, where it's translated is it. By switching those two little particles around, you make it into a question instead of into a declaration or a statement of fact. A statement of fact. It is, that's what esti is. It means it is comely that a woman pray unto God uncovered. It is. It's not, is it comely or isn't it comely? You decide. It's a declaration and a statement that says it is. And that when it says judging yourself there, again, I had to take a closer look, because it doesn't mean, just whatever you decide is fine. It means make a decision. Stop vacillating. Stop wishy-washing between. Make a decision and resolve it in yourself that it is comely that a woman pray unto God uncovered. It's a very strong directive here instead of a question. All because of that one little switcheroo that, I mean, who would know except for a geek like me? You know, they say the devil's in the details. I disagree. God is in the details. You know where the devil is? Trying to make you ignore the details. All right. So what Paul is trying to do is he's trying to separate out these things. That's separate out this idea that says that you can just decide whatever you want to, and if you've got a whole denomination that declares and says it is uncomely, then that's just as good as any other opinion. But that is not the case, and I stop repeating myself on that. Stop judging or stop vacillating. Make a decision. This statement does not leave it open for anyone to decide that women uncovered is uncomely. Paul is not inviting anyone to weigh in on whether or not they think women praying uncovered is appropriate or not. He's saying it's appropriate. He's saying it's comely. Says it's fitting, and that puts it in an entirely different light. If you'll notice again, if you look at verse 5 and 6, guess what it says there? What do the Corinthians say? It is shameful for a woman to pray uncovered. And here Paul is saying, it is comely. Can you see any clearer lines being drawn than that? They're just absolutely in direct contradiction with each other. Here's the common sense, and of course you can see it too, is that if Paul believes 5 and 6, where it says it dishonors her head, and it is a shame to her to pray uncovered, and then he also believes that in verse 13 that it is comely, how can Paul believe both things at the same time? Well, this is the translator's conundrum, and they got together in the back room or wherever, and they decided, what are we going to do about this direct contradiction? We got to do something, and little change. What did I say? I can get it back here. What's the rail switch word that takes things in an entirely different direction? Esti. Just that one little word. All I got to do is push it this way and say that esti means, is it? Pull it the other way. It says esti means it is. Takes you way different places. All right. Let's see. So, if Paul thinks that both of those things, suddenly you've got Paul contradicting himself within the same paragraph. That's a problem. That's a problem. All right, verse 14. Doth not even nature itself teach you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame to him? This one, at various times, hair is a real big deal. In Corinth, hair was a real big deal. Bigger than it was in the 60s and 70s. Here is a big deal, man. Oh, it was a big deal then, but boy, it was a big deal in the first century. It was big. They would buy and sell slaves for the one purpose and one purpose only, and that was to have a slave that would constantly be ready to dress their hair. Both men and women. Oh, man, the hair was really a big deal there. And this verse was used to say, and of course, this verse was to say that it was shameful for men to have long hair, and that's what it looks like it says on the outside. But as I've said before, there's one little problem here, and it has to do with a rail switch word. Translators again, and the whole thing has gone like lemmings over the cliff in this thing. They put an extra word in to make it say the exact opposite of what Paul said. And that word is doth at the very beginning there. Take doth out of there, and then you have not even nature itself teaches you that if a man have long hair, it is a shame unto him. By adding that little extra word that is not there, it changes it to it is a shame for a man to have long hair, instead of what Paul just finished saying is that it is not a shame, and not even nature lines up with that. Men can grow more hair than women, and it is kind of pathetic to read really intelligent guys trying to convince us in commentaries and teachings that God created men with short hair and God created women with long hair. And therefore that you're rebelling against the divine order for a man to grow long hair. Here's an interesting little tidbit that I was thinking about along the way, is that if you look in Acts 18:18, you will notice there that Paul had just finished living with the Corinthians. These very same guys that he is holding their feet to the fire in, that he's contradicting and refuting right now, he was living with them for 18 months. And during that whole time, guess what is overlooked? Guess what? He didn't cut his hair during that whole time. He didn't cut his hair during that whole time he was there. I don't know if he had a vow so that he didn't cut his hair, or if he had a vow so that he did cut his hair at the very end. But in fact, he had already left Corinth, and he was in Caesarea. Not Caesarea, Centuria. He was in Centuria when he finally cut his hair again. And so if he had let his hair grow all 18 months that he was in Corinth, and if your hair grows on an average of about an inch a month, I mean, some people's grow a lot faster than that, he would have had hair 12 to 18 inches long. Right in the middle of the Corinthians. Acts 18:18.
That's right at the end of 18.
Yep.
Notice he didn't shave his head. Everybody thinks, oh, Paul shaved his head. No, he didn't. He just cut his hair.
This guy, so sit down and dictate this letter to him. If he came in there with long hair.
They might even be trying to straighten him out.
Well, I think that they were, and
I think there's some, I don't want to read too much into it, but I think there's a little bit of a dig in here.
Set them off, that group.
oh yeah, this could really set them.
Them off, and this could have been one of the bones of contention that they said, you can't be an apostle. You do shameful things.
Or Nazarites.
Yeah, what about God making Nazarites? That said you
Oh,
can't cut your hair.
You know,
These guys are from
pagan background. If the whole idea that this is based on a Nazarite vow, which is entirely Hebrew, that's so far east of there, and it's so far out of the minds of the Corinthian people. That idea of a Nazarite vow is absolutely, it's not even there. If Paul was doing it, if Paul was doing some kind of vow, and it doesn't say it was a Nazarite, if he was doing some kind of vow, it involved not cutting his hair until he was done at Corinth.
Making a statement himself.
He really could have been.
And I'm not going to read too much in it, but what has happened there is they've said, because Paul is absolutely contradicting what is said in verse 4 of this chapter, where it says it's a shame for a man to have something down against his head. And he's turning around saying, and guess what there is in this verse that is not accounted for at all? They put a word in. They put the word doth in there to make it into something the opposite of what he was saying. But every translation has left out the word, just a little tiny word that should be in the place of doth. And it's he. And that is... that, let's see, gotta catch up with myself here. It's that little. It's just it looks like an H in the Greek alphabet, but it's pronounced A. Hey, and I think Steve read it right off of his phone one time we were talking about this. It means it expresses disapproval with what was previously said. Or did it go on? And it goes on in there. If you're in the same, you're probably not reading it from the same. I'm reading this from the Kittle and Bromley theological dictionaries. It says that there's two things. It either expresses disapproval of what was said previously, or it expresses disapproval about the existing situation. And if you look at verse 13, if you read that correctly as it is comely, you will find that there's nothing there for Paul to express disapproval of. So hey is not to say that what was just said is a bunch of nonsense. But it is saying that I am disapproving of the existing situation. I am not approving of the fact that you are teaching that nature says short hair for men and nature says long hair for women. It's not true. Even the Greek Stoics, and the Greek Stoics were the big deal in Corinth at the time. They were the predominant philosophy in Corinth at the time, because there's just so many myths that say, certain people had short hair, and I think the reason why Roman soldiers had short hair is that it was less for their enemy to grab. They shaved their beards because it was less for the enemy to grab. I think it was very practical, very practical. It was cleaner that way when you're in the field, things like that. But here's what the Stoics, the Roman Stoics and the Greek Stoics at that particular time in the first century said. It says, a man who removes hair from his body is complaining against nature that he was born a man. So even Corinthian society didn't agree with this idea. It was just something that they made up. You'll find that the elite classes called the knights. What was the term that is used? The elite classes. They all wore their hair long as a symbol of their high status. So this idea that there was some kind of thing going on with the cultures wasn't true there either. It just was a Corinthian church manufactured idea. All right, let's take a look at 15. But if a woman have long hair, it is, guess what that word is? Esti. It is a glory to her. And that's translated correctly. But if a woman have long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given her for a covering. God's a giver, and it reflects his true character when he is giving. Notice that who gave her her glory? Guess what it says in verse 7? Man got all the glory, and woman needs to glorify man. So it's a direct refutation of verse 7, where it says here that God himself has given her hair for a covering. And it was not man that bestows glory or shame upon women. It is not man that bestows that. It's God himself. And he has, in his true nature, he has not bestowed shame upon men or women. He has bestowed glory. Dignity is the word I believe that Doc came up with, and I agree with that word, that glory means dignity. Dignity. Roman males were so incredibly worried about and jealous of their dignity. And that was a mixture where these, especially the rich, especially the Roman-born converts in Corinth, they still were bringing their Roman culture in with them. It says that I'm going to bring my dignity in along with me, and I will be very, very, very observant to see that everybody is giving me the dignity that I deserve. And they justified it by little pieces of Genesis 1 and 2. Now there is one word here that really needs to be looked at in here, and that is, it says, for her hair is given her for a covering. Now, for a covering is really not it doesn't, it's been, again, this is one that's difficult here because the word in the Greek word for a is the word anti, anti. It's and it doesn't mean, well, it means instead of, or as in replacement of. That's what the word anti means. We see that in the word antichrist. That's another place where we have it, is that the Antichrist is not someone in leotards with horns. Antichrist is anything or anyone who is that replaces Christ. That's and you know, depending upon what your opinion is about that, there will be somebody that will slip in and be in the place of, instead of Christ. And but see, Antichrist has more to do with the first commandment than it has to do, and the word anti has more to do with the first commandment than it has to do with any of these other futuristic things. It has to do with, thou shalt have no other God instead of me. So anything that does that is an anti. But here it's said in a positive way. It's the word anti is used in a positive way, is that God has given her hair in place of a covering. Now the reason why that's important is because there are some that have tried to say that the word anti means in addition to. So that it reads, He has given her her hair. Given her hair is given her in addition to a covering. There is absolutely no there's no truth in that. It's just not true. Anti does not mean in addition to. It means instead of. So basically, what this verse is, it's a refutation of verse 5. You'll see that the teeter-totter is balancing out. Is that you got verse 5 over here saying it's a shame, and over here we've got a balancing word saying no, or one is not only a shame if she doesn't have it, but it's absolutely necessary that she wear it. Otherwise, God will withhold his blessing, or bad things will happen, or something like that because of the angels. And then over here we're saying it is not necessary at all to have a head covering because God has given that long hair. Does that mean that it is a glory to a man if he wears long hair, and is God given that to him as a glory also? What do you think about that? You can't do that because he doesn't say anything about it. He just says that nature does not teach you that it's a shame. So it's not shameful. It's not something that you're going to get into a spot where you have to be shaved or shorn. All right. Can I just go on to verse 16 here, and we're just gonna do this thing. Be done with it. There's a lot more that could be said, but it's time. Here's the next one right here. But if any man seem to be contentious, we have no such custom, neither the churches of God. This one is got a lot of controversy in it too, along the way here. If any man seem to be contentious, let's take a look at some of those words there. Seem to be. That word there means to have a reputation for. So my King James translation is not very helpful as to what Paul was really trying to get at, because what he's saying is that if there is any man who has a reputation for, that's known to be, that, and then we have to deal with the next word here, which is contentious. Contentious does not mean somebody who's quarrelsome. It's a compound word. It has two parts to it. The first part of the word is philo. Philo means to be fond of, just to be fond of, to love. That's what philo means. Philadelphia. Nikos is the next part. So it's philonikos. A contentious person is a philonikos. Someone who has a reputation and is fond of something. What do you think Nikos means? Nikos means to be superior over and to prevail over the top of others. If you are a man that is fond of being superior over others, is what Paul is saying there. Does that describe some people we've been talking about? Oh man, I tell you, it didn't stop with the Corinthians, I'll tell you that. Those within the church, that there's just a reputation, they've got a reputation that they want to make sure that you are appropriately respectful to them. And you need to show it. That's the contentious man. That's who he's really talking about. What this verse has been made into is it says that anybody disagrees with the way Corinthians do head coverings is a contentious man. And that's the way it's been interpreted by many teachers along the way, that the contentious person is somebody who disagrees with head coverings. You're a contentious man. And guess what? We have no custom of disagreeing with head coverings. That's the way it is understood many times. Well,
The Greek wrong it is that way, but
Oh, yeah.
I don't know how you get it if you read it this way.
well, everybody's hoping that you don't know what Philonikos means. And of course, I didn't either until I took a look at it here. I was born and bred on the idea that says that if you disagree with what is being said in verses 3 through 10, you are a contentious man. That is not what it says at all. It says that if you love the preeminence, you are a contentious man. The word there is we have no custom. The word there for custom is sunethia, and it just simply means force of habit. It doesn't mean a commandment from Paul. It doesn't mean one of the traditions that he was praising them for keeping. It simply means if we do not have a habit in the churches of God. We do not have this habit. Now, what's the habit? We don't have a habit of disagreeing with head coverings? Is that the habit that we don't have? Or we don't have the habit of head coverings? Or the habit of lording it over. Because if you're a contentious man, we don't have that habit in the churches. See, so you can go three different directions on that. Either it means we don't have a habit of disagreeing with head coverings, we don't have a habit of head coverings, or we don't have a habit of loving the preeminence and lording it over people. Yes. And that one you can find all over in the scriptures. And so I would say that from what I can see is that the contentious is linked with the habit. They have a habit. And they've done this, and in the Corinthian church, they did this thing enough of requiring that everybody show them adequate respect and dignity, and they did it enough until it became a law. That's how a habit gets to be a habit. You just do it over and over again with authority. And suddenly, it's not just a habit anymore. It's the way things have to be done. And that's what I think is going on here, is that the habit is loving to lord it over. And the churches had no habits like that. None of the churches of God had that habit. Let's see if there's anything else that I've missed here. There are some translations that will say, we have no other custom. And that's, again, another one of those places where I just wanted to point out that that is not the word that is used there. The word is of this kind. No such custom. The word for such is toyotas. And it means of this kind. It doesn't mean such, and it does not mean other. Because if you use such or other in there, you can say, we have no other custom other than head coverings. And if you are contentious about head coverings, you are on your own. Because all the rest of the churches do head coverings too. If you take that little word and give it a little rail switch. But the word means of this kind. We have no habit of this kind. We have no habit of this kind. If you say we have no other, then you've made it say exactly the opposite of what Paul intended it to say. Sorry?
Looks like they did that a few times, changed it from one to another.
Well,
I was hoping that you would. I don't want to say the word that I promised I wouldn't say about it. It seems like there's a pattern in this. It seems like there is, and it took more than one person to collaborate to do this, to switch statements around to mean something else in a very subtle way.
Did they think they were right? They were following custom more than,
I have to be careful about my attitude.
so they were.
Do you want to close it up?
yeah, thank you. Let's close that off.
That concludes my study on these verses. There's much, much more. I'll put it in a book.